Where did you go, Colonel?
I joined the Chinese Army.
Are you kidding, sir?
I joined the Chinese 8th Route Army. Remember that march they made during the Civil War, 6,000 miles clear across the country? All the Chinese are united now against the Japs. I've been hearing marvelous things about the...
This 1943 film was inspired by a real American officer, Evans Carlson. He was the first US military observer embedded with Chinese Communist forces. How did it all happen?
Evans Carlson was a U.S. Marine officer. He went to China for the first time in 1927. He was part of a battalion of Marines that were sent to Shanghai to protect U.S. citizens during the Northern Expedition. When he first comes to China, he doesn't know anything about the country. And when he gets there in 1927, you look at his letters home and he's using all of every derogatory slur about Chinese people that you might expect to find from an American Marine in 1927.
Carlson's biography, The Big Yankee, records his first impression of China. People moving each on the heels of the other. It was not at first a comfortable place for him, but as he learned Chinese and immersed himself in the culture, his fascination with the country quickly grew.
There is a letter that he writes to his mother back home in 1929. He says, my interest in anything other than China ebbs with each passing day. So back then, the Marines would get rotated every few years to a different site. He spent some time in Nicaragua, he spent some time back in the United States, but he kept requesting to be sent back to China. So ultimately, he would do 3 tours in China as a Marine intelligence officer and really wound up sort of banking his career on it.
In 1937, Carlson was deployed to China for the 3rd time with a special mission. President Roosevelt, whom Carlson once served as the executive officer of his protected Marine detachment, asked the captain to write him personally about Japan's invasion of the country. He would be in Shanghai and watch the war from rooftops overlooking the Suzhou Creek, or from the buildings on the perimeter of the international settlement. Once he saw Japanese tanks and artillery obliterating at a range of 60 yards 2,000 poorly armed Chinese.
Although the Chinese side did not prevail, it demonstrated Chinese resistance and defiance, far exceeding Japanese expectations, and helped galvanize Chinese national sentiment. It also showed Japan's true face to the rest of the world, which was revealed more fully thereafter in Nanjing.
By late 1937, Carlson had learned through clandestine reports that the 8th Route Army was fighting the Japanese rather successfully, more ably than the nationalists at Shanghai, and with a new kind of strategy. Even more shocking were the first-hand accounts from his old friend, Edgar Snow.
So Edgar Snow had just typed up his first draft of Red Star over China, and Evans Carlson read it in Shanghai in 1937, in the middle of the Battle of Shanghai. He kind of felt the earth shift beneath him when he was reading this book, because up until that point, he had seen communists in general as just being sort of subversive, anti-foreign, and Edgar Snow said, actually, you're going to be very surprised.
The Big Yankee records the following conversation.
My God, Ed. Are there really such men as Zhu De, Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, or have you made them up?
I haven't made them up. They are there for anybody to see and talk to and live with. Even an American naval intelligence officer, one might say, especially.
But what kind of men are they?
They're different, Evans. They're humble, earnest men, scrupulously honest in word and action.
In action too?
See for yourself, Evans, Snow encouraged. And so, he did. Mao Zedong, Zhu De, Nie Rongzhen. In these photos, one man appears alongside them all, US Marine officer Evans Carlson. Between 1937 and 1938, Carlson traveled thousands of kilometers, venturing deep behind enemy lines to observe China's war of resistance. So, what did he see?
In 1937, intrigued by Edgar Snow's Red Star over China manuscript, Carlson resolved to see the Chinese Communist forces for himself. With Snow's encouragement and help, he made his way to their headquarters in northern China. There, among the 8th Route Army, Carlson encountered a strikingly different set of political and ethical concepts. One thing that struck him was the unique relationship between officers and soldiers. On duty, subordinates saluted their superiors with formal military decorum, as in any Western army. But off duty, those ranks seemed to vanish. They sat together as equals, chatting freely. In daily life, officers and soldiers lived under the same conditions: the same clothes, the same food, the same sleeping accommodations. At the 8th Route Army headquarters, Carlson also developed a family-like relationship with Commander-in-Chief Zhu De.
He was absolutely blown away by him. Carlson was used to Chinese generals being like Chiang Kai-shek, with his epaulettes and strutting around and shouting at people and stuff. And Zhu De was just friendly and had a big smile and was unassuming. He was self-effacing. He didn't wear a special uniform. He was extremely close to his men. And Carlson just loved him.
Carlson also met Mao Zedong in a cave dwelling in Yan'an. He described Mao as a humble, kindly, lonely genius, striving in the darkness of the night to find a peaceful and an equitable way of life for his people. The two talked late into the night, and Mao believed that China cannot be beaten as long as its people have the will to endure and resist. That will can only be built and sustained if the people have confidence in their leaders and are provided with hope for a better way of life. This was why they trained their leaders to live simply, administer justly, and help the people address their problems. And he believed the better way of life lies in developing democracy and teaching the people how to govern themselves.
Carlson's observation went beyond the 8th Route Army's headquarters. He also visited the front lines. He even wrote to then U.S. Ambassador to China Nelson T. Johnson, expressing his willingness to face personal danger for the sake of the trip. So, what did he witness along the march?
Having joined the army on the road, Carlson was deeply impressed by the soldiers' endurance. Probably no other military organization in the world is able to accomplish the long distances on foot, for example, that have become routine with these men, he wrote. On one occasion, he marched with around 600 8th Route Army troops through treacherous terrain, deep gorges, dense forests, and swift, bitterly cold rivers. Yet they pressed on for 24 hours without rest, covering 58 miles. Carlson noted that in his own country or in Nicaragua, such a march would have seen some men give up, desert, or surrender to fatigue. But in the 8th Route Army, when he asked one soldier whether he was tired, the reply was, "If a man has only legs, he gets tired."
Some of these patrols that he was with, they would walk 40 or 50 miles a day in the freezing cold. They were wearing felt-soled shoes. A lot of them had no overcoats in the winter. They had no rear support, so they were carrying their own rations with them on the march. The weapons they had depended on who they had been fighting most recently. So if they'd been fighting, warlord troops, they had warlord weapons. If they'd been fighting the Japanese, they had Japanese weapons. That they were really scrounging what they could get. But their willingness, in spite of all of these difficulties and disadvantages, to keep going and without complaint, and to have a strong political sense of why they were fighting. This also was something that Carlson internalized and brought home with him.
Carlson believed that the soldiers' strong conviction and endurance in battle came from their political education in the army. He found that each unit had a political commissar whose authority was equal to that of the military commander. The two kept each other informed about their professional activities and consulted before making major decisions. Training periods were divided into 60% military instruction to 40% political indoctrination, as Carlson put it.
They are going to be far more effective on the battlefield. compared to a Japanese soldier who's just ordered out into the field to go and shoot these people.
It is, I believe, the most self-restrained, self-disciplined army in the world, said Carlson of the 8th Route Army. What I have seen is a revelation, an experience that I shall never forget. Between 1937 and 1938, U.S. Marine officer Evans Carlson observed the communist-led 8th Route Army in its resistance against Japanese aggression. As a military officer, what kind of tactics would have caught his attention?
One of the things that he learned in this process was ways to use weaknesses as strength. 8th Route Army could not possibly stand up to the Japanese in traditional positional warfare where you're just fighting face to face. The Japanese had better weapons, they had far better equipment, they had all of these resources that the communists didn't have. But the communists were able to break into small groups, they were able to conduct ambushes, they were able to attack weak points.
The communists in fact turned to a different kind of warfare, guerrilla warfare, and they not just applied, but adapted. In Carlson's book, The Chinese Army, he explained his tactics in detail. The success of this style of warfare depends in large measure on the possession by the guerrilla forces of superior information regarding the enemy's strength and movements. Pitched battles with strong enemy forces are avoided. When a strong Japanese column invades a certain area, the guerrilla forces move to the sides of the line of advance, attack the flanks and rear of the enemy, and cut his line of communication. At night, the camps of the enemy are subjected to constant rapier-like thrusts, designed to disturb his rest and wear him out. Food is removed from the countryside ahead of his advance. In a letter to Roosevelt, Carlson compared the 8th Route Army adopting guerrilla tactics to be an eel and a swarm of hornets harassing an elephant. I can well believe the Japanese officer who remarked in his diary, "The 8th Route Army gives me a headache," he wrote.
But what made communist guerrilla warfare truly distinct was not just the tactics, it was also the deep reliance on people.
As Mao Zedong famously said, guerrilla warfare cannot for a moment be separated from the masses. This is the most fundamental principle. From the very outset of the war, the Communist Party has insisted on mobilizing the people and relying on the people.
One of the things about the Communist Army that Carlson was so incredibly impressed by was what a good job they were doing of cultivating loyalty from ordinary people. When he was traveling through the rear base areas, what he saw was how the Communist Army was organizing these people, teaching them nationalism, teaching them patriotism, organizing them into support units of partisans and militias. Even if there were peasants who they didn't have, guns or anything like that, maybe they just had spears, and they could still relay intelligence about where the Japanese were. They could still help wounded soldiers get to a hospital. There are all kinds of ways that they could provide information.
Carlson's biography, The Big Yankee, recalls a remark from an 8th Route Army soldier. Comrade Peng Dehuai, our great guerrilla leader, once said that important as tactics are, we could not exist if the majority of the people did not support us. They are our eyes and ears. They hide us and feed us. We are nothing but their fists.
The CPC's People's War was vitally important for two reasons. First, it brought effective organization and tactics to those who were resisting, especially behind the enemy lines. Second, while these lessons demonstrated the value of the CPC to the masses and were later mobilized successfully during China's Civil War, they also contributed significantly to China's development as a modern nation. Now, we must keep in mind that the lack of development had left China vulnerable to foreign aggression. So in this respect, we have to acknowledge the CPC succeeded where its predecessors, the Qing and the nationalists, had failed, precisely because it mobilized the masses, precisely because it saw the strategic necessity and social justice associated with turning peasants into citizens and directly linking their fate with those of the nation.
As his observations deepened, Carlson began doing something highly unusual.
While he's traveling with the 8th Route Army patrols, he really develops an absolutely profound sympathy for the Chinese people in the face of this horrific Japanese invasion. And so as he's moving through the different base areas, he's giving speeches, sometimes to thousands, sometimes, in one case at least, to 10,000 people listening, Chinese people listening, telling them your resistance is admirable, that all sort of good, kindly Americans are deeply sympathetic to your cause and they believe in you.
Carlson was also unsparing in his praise of Chinese communists, calling them the most progressive democratic force in China.
And this is something that got him into real trouble in the Marine Corps. So his superior officer tells him to stop talking to Chinese audiences and stop talking to reporters. And that's the point where he quits the Marines.
As the first US military observer embedded with the Chinese Communist forces, Carlson saw people fighting not just with weapons, but with conviction. A party committed not to privilege, but to the people, and a country not yet strong, but full of promise.
By 1938, Carlson was writing to President Roosevelt saying basically China is fighting America's war for it.
Why did American officer Evans Carlson see Chinese people's war of resistance against Japanese aggression as a fight not just for China, but for the wide world, even the distant United States?
While observing the Chinese Communist Forces' resistance in 1937 and 1938, Carlson gained a first-hand understanding of both the brutality and the expansionist ambitions of Japanese militarism. In his 1940 book, he warned, "The madness which must give Americans pause is the mental attitude of the Japanese military and naval officers towards the program of conquest. They are imbued with the concept of divine mission. They have the mission to carry the Japanese brand of culture to the four corners of the earth, and the conquest of China is regarded by them as merely a stepping stone to that end. A Japanese-dominated China would make available the vast reservoir of manpower and of natural resources with which to build an army and a navy which could carry conquest farther afield." In other words, as long as China held the line, it held back Japan's expansionist momentum, and Carlson had long believed in the Chinese Communist Forces' ability to resist. As early as December 1937, he wrote in a letter that the 8th Route Army will continue to resist the Japanese if every other unit in China lays down its arms, and the resistance will be effective.
All you have to do is imagine what would happen if in 1942 China surrendered to Japan. It would have freed up about 1 million Japanese troops, either to invade the Soviet Union through Siberia, or to fight in the Pacific against the United States. I don't think the Soviets would have been able to survive that. Similarly, if you had hundreds of thousands more Japanese troops being launched into the Pacific, that would have completely changed the calculus for the United States Navy.
In fact, united as one under the banner of the Chinese United Front against Japanese aggression, which was advocated and established by the Communist Party of China, China fought relentlessly against the majority of troops of Japanese militarism and made a national sacrifice of over 35 million casualties. During 14 years of fierce anti-fascist fighting, China engaged and tied down over 2/3 of the Japanese army, inflicting 70% of Japan's wartime military casualties.
80 years since China and the world triumphed over fascism, some values still resonate deeply. Resilience in the face of aggression, unity in times of crisis, and an unwavering commitment to justice. In a world where new dangers continue to emerge, truth and memory remain our strongest defense. Peace is never given. Justice must be guarded by every generation.